Peaceful People. This is Emily from the Peaceful People Project. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my absence from the channel last week. Unfortunately, I had a very bad cold and I was therefore unable to make a video. So you're probably wondering why I'm wearing a yoga top. One of the things that I really love to do is both practice and teach yoga. And since yesterday was World Yoga Day, I figured this would be a good time to make a video about yoga. Now, when a lot of people think of yoga, they think of poses like this. Now, the images that I just showed you are images of very advanced poses done by people with perfect bodies. This is what you see most of in the media, in the movies, and in television. But it's only a very small part of what yoga is. You see it the most on the screens because it's cool, it's sexy, it gets ratings up. But it's not yoga. Not entirely anyway. Yoga is not just for people with perfect bodies. Yoga is not just for athletes. Yoga is for everyone. There are modifications of almost every asana or pose designed to suit every ability level. Yoga is about listening to your body and meeting it where it is. I had a really good experience of this just a few weeks ago. I was teaching a private yoga class at the DIY Arts Collective, and when I'm teaching private classes, it's very different from if I'm in front of a group of people. In group classes, it's generally accepted that you observe silence in the yoga room. In private classes, when you're one-on-one, then some conversation, some back and forth is okay. And on this particular day, it was really useful. My one yoga student told me that the modified side angle that we were doing in the standing pose flow worked for him. It was accessible and it felt good. However, the full side angle wasn't working for him that day. It was painful. I was really proud of him for initiating this conversation with me and for telling me this, because I knew that since he felt comfortable having this conversation with me, he was already having it with his own body, with himself. That is yoga. It's about meeting your body where it is in any particular day, any particular moment, any particular pose. And that can change day by day. For example, one time I was taking a yoga class at the YMCA, and previously I had been able to get my forehead to the floor in seated straddle forward bend. So I went into that pose, and what I didn't take into account was it was very cold out that day. It was about minus 20 degrees outside, Celsius, for anyone who uses Fahrenheit. So I didn't take into account the cold weather, and I didn't take into account that I just walked inside from outside. So I went into the full version of seated straddle forward bend with my forehead on the floor, and I injured my hamstring. Now, I was able to return to practicing yoga, but only after spending some time in the pool, swimming, and stretching out my hamstring. When I returned to my yoga practice, I had to do beginner modifications of a lot of the poses. I had to put my ego aside and accept that that was where my body was in that particular moment because I was injured. Before very long, I was back to doing all the poses that I did before. However, if I decided that I had failed at yoga because I was temporarily less flexible than usual, then that would be the only true failure. Walking away from my practice and walking away from something I loved. As I said, there are variations of almost every pose so that yoga is accessible to everyone. So I'd like to show you one of my favorite poses Chakrasana, or wheel pose, which is also known as upward facing bow or Urdhva Dhanurasana. So I'm going to show you the beginner modification to this pose first, and then I'm going to show you the full version. So for half bridge pose, we begin lying down on our backs. Inhaling, we bring our heels in as close to our sits bones as feels comfortable, bending our knees and pointing them up to the sky. Taking a deep exhale, we inhale and rise our sits bones slowly off the mat, coming up as far as feels comfortable, creating a nice long line from our knees to our sacrum, stomach, chest, all the way down to our chin. Holding for a moment. Exhale and release. For a full bridge pose, we begin the same way that we began half bridge, lying on our backs, bending our knees, and bringing our heels in as close to the sits bones as feels comfortable. Exhale, now inhale. The sits bones come off the mat, making a nice long line from your knees all the way down to your chin. Now, you can leave the pose there and do a half bridge, or if you'd like to continue into full bridge, you can clasp your hands underneath your body, wriggle your shoulder blades together, and come just that little bit higher. To challenge yourself further, you can lift one leg up to the sky, and then the other, for a three-legged bridge or dancing bridge. But you shouldn't attempt this modification until you're perfectly comfortable and stable in a regular bridge pose. Exhale, unclasp the hands, wriggle your shoulder blades back out, and slowly sink back to the mat to come out of your bridge pose. A wheel pose, or an upward-facing bow pose, begins much the same way that a bridge pose does. Again, you lie on your back, bend your knees, point them up to the sky, and bring your heels in as close to your sits bones as feels comfortable. You inhale, your arms up to the sky. Exhale, bend your elbows, and bring your palms flat on the mat with your fingertips pointing towards your feet. You also want to move your hair out of the way if you have long hair. Inhale, bring your lower body up off the mat, and exhale, pushing through your hands, bringing your upper body up off the mat, creating an arch through your body with most of the weight in your hands. You can also dress this pose up by lifting one leg and then the other leg for a three-legged or dancing wheel. However, this is a very advanced pose, and you should only attempt it if you're comfortable with a regular wheel pose. Exhale, softening the elbows and sinking down to the mat. Slowly, head, back, and then your sits bones. So that was just one pose with 3 different variations for beginning, intermediate, and advanced yoga participants. If I was going to be teaching that pose in class, then I would begin by cueing half bridge pose and bridge pose for the people who felt comfortable going that far. And Then I would cue the wheel pose or upward facing bow pose for people who wanted more of a challenge and who were comfortable doing that pose. This is true of almost every yoga pose. It can always be modified to suit anyone of any ability level. So that's what makes it possible to teach people who've started yoga maybe that day, that moment, that class, along with people who've been doing yoga for years. It makes it possible to teach yoga to people who are rehabilitating injuries, along with people who are in top physical form. It makes it possible to teach yoga to teenagers and senior citizens in the same class. To me, yoga is the ultimate all-inclusive activity because it can be tailored to anyone. Now, just because I teach yoga, I don't want you guys to think that I think that my yoga journey is completed. There are some poses that I'm not able to do yet. For example, crow pose. For those of you who don't know, it looks like this. So that was a picture of a person doing a crow pose. As I said before, I have not yet been able to successfully do this pose. I've still tried, and I've fallen out of it many, many times, and I've gotten some pretty good bruises in the process. I might get it eventually, and I might not, but either way, I'm okay with that, because not being able to do one specific pose does not make my yoga practice any less valid. In fact, in yoga, the asana practice is just one component. Another important part of yoga is meditation. In most classes, the yoga practice will end with everyone lying in Shavasana, or final resting pose, while the teacher reads through a guided relaxation or a meditation. During the meditation, you might focus on each one of the chakras, if the studio allows it, or you might just focus on clearing your mind of all the negative thoughts and clutter and busyness and to-do lists that flutter through your brain on any given day. Now, believe it or not, Shavasana used to be one of my biggest challenges. During this time, I had a family member who was experiencing some fairly serious health problems, and I believed this to be, in a lot of ways, my fault. So during that time, I literally couldn't meditate because every time I went into Shavasana and closed my eyes, my brain would be polluted with thoughts of my family member and guilt about how I brought this on her. Eventually, she got better, and I got over that hurdle. But that's why a lot of people who teach yoga and a lot of people who do yoga will tell you that Shavasana is the most important pose to get good at. In Shavasana, in meditation, that is where your body and your mind come together. That's where you reflect on what you did in your practice that day, where you reflect on how your body feels and where your mind is. Without that component of yoga, it's not exactly yoga. It's just stretching and moving through poses for an hour. So, I hope that I was able to teach you something about yoga today, and I hope that I was able to clear up some of your misconceptions about yoga. As you can see, I do not have a perfect body by any stretch of the imagination, but that has never stopped me from doing yoga and enjoying it to the fullest. So, at the end of every yoga class, we conclude by saying Namaste, which means the light in me bows to the light in you. So, just as I would end a yoga class, I'm going to inhale my arms up to the sky, bring my hands into prayer position, bring them down to my heart, and Namaste.